Welcome back to Fireside Friday Nights. This is a continuation of the last episode, and where we're continuing to talk about why we believe what we believe. We hope you enjoy.
There's kind of like a line between faith and, well, not sort of, faith and works. Like, you can say you believe and do nothing to show it, and then, again, naturally we're going to judge you, and it's going to seem like, well, it doesn't seem like you believe.
But at the same time, you can do good things, but without faith, are they really good things?
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's empty works, really. You're trying. It's not for any spirit. It's not for godly gain. It's not for God's glory. It's if you're doing good things just because you're a good person, quote unquote.
That's one of the toughest concepts for Christians to say to unbelievers. You, as an unbeliever, are loved by God in every way, but there's nothing that you have ever done that has ever been good in His eyes. Like, how do we paint that?
And that
picture?
would hurt. Yeah. I mean,
How would we paint that picture to an unbeliever, saying, as great as you seem from us, from our human perspective, there's nothing you've ever done in God's eyes that are good? Like that's a part that Christians and unbelievers struggle with.
And that's one hard thing to say too, especially going back to like the homosexuality thing. If they don't have the moral code that I have, and I say, yeah, just because you love that person, you're wrong, right? And they go, what did I ever do? What did I do? What did I do to you? Why are you getting mad at me just because your Bible says this, right? That's what your book says. That's not what I believe. My truth isn't your truth.
Yeah,
and
their moral compass and our moral compass are...
How do you refute someone who says my truth isn't your truth? Subjective truth, you know?
Maybe because everyone like has their own like pet sin and whatnot. It's like this is what they struggle with. Even going back to homosexuality and how would I even start by like talking about Jesus with them? And I think the best way is maybe not break the elephant in the room and just be like, hey, by the way, you being gay, absolutely wrong.
It'd be hypocritical to say
Exactly.
God
It's
is
like,
love, but
yeah.
you're gay, so...
I have my own sin that I'm dealing with and I struggle with. Maybe it's not as public as yours, but we're the same. You are no better than I am. So what's to say that I need to point out your sin without saying like anything else? Like, start off by talking to them about Jesus, the gospel, and start off there and then work your way down instead of just pointing out their sin. Because who are you to say that, hey, you're doing this wrong?
I'm
doing a lot of things wrong.
Sorry. That once again ties into what I was saying earlier. Way too often, Christians are actually the ones, though we're supposed to be loving, we're the ones that come out and like seem offended or hateful towards people that aren't of our belief or have our priorities, whereas there's unbelievers that seem way more loving than us. And who are we to say that what they're doing is wrong? But unbelievers are way more understanding than us.
That was one thing I said in our last episode. The Bible, like what the Christians teach to be like against homosexuality, for example, hasn't changed. It's that the world has gone further down this never-ending spiral against the Bible, right? The morals of the world are turning further against the Bible. Therefore, it seems like we're more against them. And one thing in my religion class, we had a question box type thing, and I asked the question. I said, "Is it sinful for us to condemn people for their sin, like to call out their sin, right? Because I'm not perfect, but how do I tell someone to stop living in the lifestyle they're living in?" And then continuing with that question, it was like, if someone's living in a homosexual lifestyle, they're putting that as their public identity, right? They're making that part of their lifestyle. You cannot be a gay Christian because you're saying that your sin is part of your lifestyle, and you can't title that as part of who you are, you know, your identity. Our identity should be in Christ.
Unbelievers kind of think that, as us Americans, they believe that America is kind of turned against people that aren't Christians, but in reality, it's the opposite. When America was founded, our Constitution was kind of based on Christian morals. Everything that we believed back then, or a lot of the things we believed back then, had to do with Christianity, and the majority of the country was Christian. So as time has been going on and more people have been fading away from Christianity, their views kind of think that Christianity has been fading away from them, when in reality it's not the same. That's why nowadays we have more and more people thinking Christians are haters on other people who have other beliefs. oh, Christians hate people who are homosexual, people who aren't Christian. We just hate other people. But in reality, we're not fading away. We're not the ones hating. What they believe is just faded away from what we believe.
Right, and I'm really glad you brought that up, because one of the things I've thought about to talk about to unbelievers of like, why do you think we have the law? Like, why are there law enforcements that enforce these laws against us? If so, my whole thing about evolution is that if we believe that if you believe in evolution and that we came from nothing and then there's something and we evolved, one of the greatest things that I would say you have to come into consideration is survival of the fittest. And it's basically with that mindset is that I'm better than you, so I'm just better than you. So basically saying like, if I was an evolutionist, right, and I consider thinking about survival of the fittest, of like, I'm just better than you. So like, if I like, there are sinful things out there in the world, and to say that, I can't really say it, but like,
Why would you have a moral compass as an evolutionist? Why would you have...
right, there is no moral compass.
Well,
like,
yeah.
I can do all of these sinful
When
things
you-
because I want to and because
Right.
I can.
When you think of survival of the fittest, kind of, there's really no point to help anyone ever.
Right.
Like if you're not as fit or as good as me, then you shouldn't be around.
If I'm going to die and there's just going to be nothing after I die, then what's the point of my life? Whatever's...
Well, then it would just be to live for joy, you know?
right, I want to do what I want to do, so
Right,
I'm
so
just
there's-
going to do it.
So I don't care if it affects you in any way, shape, or form.
I was just gonna say with that whole like moral compass thing and like living for joy, there are laws set in our country that you obviously can't just go assault the crap out of a man, right? And
My bad.
that's a moral compass. The laws that are set here, there are things that you do that you will get in trouble for because they're against the law.
Right.
But
So
why?
Who said yeah, exactly.
but yeah, why is there a law?
If you were born out of
Not
nothing,
not saying I'm like, okay, why is there a law? But saying
But- well, yeah.
in
like-
the hypothetical.
yeah, like if you were born out of nothing, you wouldn't have a right or wrong. We have a natural sense of right or wrong in our society and in almost the entire world. You can go up to a person and they're going to know. Let's say right now, if I punch Jacob, I'm going to feel pretty bad because
Hypothetically.
I feel a little bit of physical tension between you two, given that you both tried to hit each other.
Yeah,
on
if
the
I
pod.
slap you in the face or if you punch me, go on.
it's I'm gonna think that's wrong. I don't want to hit him because like beating someone up is wrong to me. But where did I even get that from? I was born with that I don't want to hurt people.
It's from
But-
God.
Exactly, and it's from something you can't say that like you being made of nothing, you have a right or wrong because it just does not make any sense. If it was survival of the fittest, like Dominic put very, very nicely, then you would just go around doing what you wanted to do, hurting who you wanted to hurt.
And with that, the ability to love. If there is no God, if there's nothing that created us, and evidently if we were all just a bunch of accidents, why am I... what is there to love? Why am I supposed to be loved? Like, love... Why would love even exist if we were all just a bunch of mistakes, evidently?
Okay, I mean, that's actually such a good point. How can order come out of chaos? You know, the Big Bang. If
Exactly.
you're saying the Big Bang's true,
It doesn't.
order
And how
can't
does
come out of-
something come from nothing? But I think we're...
There's
a pretty
so many
magical
issues with the
freaking-
Big Bang.
Okay, but then also you think
And
about like the mechanical hands that we have, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's block, block, block. They all pivot on these hinges. They have a secondary hinge. That's created with intelligent design. But if you believe in evolution, you believe that my hand with all the ligaments and muscles all
Individual
stitched together.
fingerprints.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that was just oops. That was just some dirt that exploded billions of years ago, you know? And say I'm not even like I feel like I would want to debate someone on saying why I believe creation's true. And then I like beforehand I would go into like a huge deep like discovery, talk to so many people about it. But I want to be able to witness my faith and talk about these kind of things because we're just doing it here on the podcast with like-minded individuals amongst ourselves, right?
Appreciate it.
And we're talking about why we think these things, but we can't really show why we do. We can't really say, oh, you believe that? well, here's why. Or here's why I'm trying to give you. Here's what I'm trying to tell you, and this is why not that you're wrong, but this is what the truth is. You know,
Right. Like
you've been misguided, or
Isn't that just telling them they're wrong with added steps?
But you gotta put it like in a nice way. So
well, you're
that
not
you
wrong.
don't
I'm
offend
just
Yeah.
right. So
okay, so that's also the thing. You can't just tell someone they're wrong. Being a witness,
No.
you can't just tell someone
Because
they're
that'll
wrong.
shut them off right away.
very unloving way to approach a non-believer is just to flat out say everything that you've ever believed is just not correct, and
You're going to hell.
I have all the answers.
I need that
wrong.
clipped. I need someone to clip that.
Yes, that is wrong for multiple reasons, not just not doing it with love, because we don't have all the answers.
We've had a couple weird side tangents lately, but to go back to a main point is passing judgment on other people and why we should not pass judgment on other people. Like I said earlier, we are easy. We are the first to blame, to judge, to look at people in other situations and just criticize them. But why? Why is that?
Okay, I have a question for you guys. How would you?
Yeah.
So you're witnessing to someone, right? Or you're preaching the gospel. You're telling people about the message of Christ. How would you go about doing that? Like, just like give me your rundown on your message that you would give to somebody.
What kind of scenario are we in?
Okay, let's just say you meet a dude at work, and he tells you he doesn't believe in anything. He's
Totally neutral.
let's say that he doesn't believe God exists. Even let's just say that he doesn't believe anything. He's just an atheist, right? Not that he's agnostic, so he thinks something's out there, he doesn't know what it is. So he doesn't believe that there's a God at all. How would you guys honestly go about telling something about that? Like, and say you've been friends for like 3 months. You guys are getting to know each other. You guys are hanging out and stuff, right? You know each other.
I would say put the thought of Jesus on the table. Give them a light, like, hey, if you think there's someone out there, here's a possibility in what I see. And it's not always going to work the first time. I mean, it might, and that's great. But usually on average, for a lot of people, it takes them at least 7 times to memorize something or to learn something that you're trying to teach them. So if you're trying to show them Jesus, it's not going to work the first time. It might even take years. So, I mean, if you're having these kind of talks, be like, hey, I know I have a belief that I understand, and maybe you'd want to understand too, and I can help you, and if you'd want to learn more about it. Instead of being like, hey, by the way, since you don't believe anything, you're going to hell. Like, you can't just tell that to somebody.
Yeah, you have
Okay.
to do it in love.
How do you bring it up though? Okay, so say someone's you're hanging out one day, and so they weren't like, yo, there's something different about you. Like, they didn't say that. Say you're like, hey man, I've just been praying for you lately, and I'm just hoping that you can get to know God. Do you do it like that, or do you say, I believe in Jesus, and if you want to do that too? Because I feel like that's just like brush off, right?
I'd first-
If you give them a personal thing where you're like, hey man, I've been praying for you lately. I just wanted you to know.
First, you
You
gotta
do it like
ask.
that.
Yeah. Do they even know what that means?
First, you have to ask.
That's
Are
true.
you
That's
a
true.
believer
Oh.
of God? And if they say no, I'm not a believer of God. Why do you believe in God? Or if they even acknowledge your belief in God, the first point, I don't know how much of what we said earlier made the cut. I don't know how much of that will be filtered out. But the first point will just be creation. First of all, there's no way stuff came from no stuff. There's no way everything that we have here came from nothing.
It's
That's
impossible.
That's the first reason. Second reason, I'd point to history. First, the life of Jesus Christ. Well, first of all, why is everything in history believed anyways? That's a whole nother conversation. Why do we believe in anything that has happened in history?
Because it was written down and people told it people, you know?
Right. Jesus
Eyewitness
Christ.
testimony.
Jesus Christ in his life, death, and resurrection. Well, Jacob, why do you believe in that? There was many people in the first century who were persecuted for their Christianity, for their beliefs, everything they believed. They were persecuted by people like Emperor Nero in the Roman civilization earlier. First of all, what's there to get persecuted for if there's no God? Why would you openly say, oh yeah, I'm a Christian, I believe this guy lived, died, and rose from the dead 3 days later, if there's no incentive for you?
Yeah, people don't die for something that they know is false.
Yeah, that they know is false.
Right. If you have, like, even people who die for the wrong thing, say the people who willingly did, back to your analogy earlier, the people who willingly flew jets into the Trade Center in 2001.
Mm-hmm.
They died believing that what they were doing was right. Now
according to their moral code, because
Yeah,
they're I mean, I'm not going to say that they were Muslim or whatever, like calling out their religion, right? But they believed that this was like a holy work, or like killing the infidels, right? As the Muslim teaching would teach.
But the difference between Christianity and Muslim belief, Buddhist belief, Islamic belief, the difference between all of that is only one of those options believed, oh yeah, this man lived, died, rose 3 days later, and we saw him. We saw him and we heard of other people who saw him. That's the difference. And then you look at people like Peter, all of the disciples who ended up going out, spreading the gospel, dying for what they believed, dying for what they saw. Grayson, if you told me, oh yeah, I'm going to live a perfect life, die a perfect death, rise 3 days later, and then you didn't rise 3 days later after you died, or you didn't rise after 3 days later after you died, I don't know why in the world I would still go tell people, oh yeah, my friend Grayson, he's God. Like, I wouldn't do that. But if I were to see you rise from the dead, I would believe you're God. I would go tell everybody to the
That's
point
actually
of
such a good
death.
point. Well, I was actually going to say, because you were talking about Paul, right? If I'm preaching the gospel, I am going to Paul's story. No person in Paul's situation would have ever become a Christian unless it was true.
You're just completely persecuting every person who believes in Christianity, and then one day you just start believing it yourself. If there was no God, why in the world would you start doing that?
And then you've
went
been
through
stoned.
right?
You've been stoned to death, died, probably woke back up out of God's grace,
You get thrown in
walked
jail.
up, stumbled back to the next town, and kept going.
He's gotten drowned pretty much. Let's
Bit
see.
by a snake.
Jailed, bit by a snake.
Shipwrecked.
Jailed,
Stoned.
shipwrecked, stoned, whipped multiple times,
Yeah, and so like
hit
if
with rods.
yeah, and so like if his like who he was following was a liar, why would I even want to go through all of that?
Exactly.
Just because like he never rose, so then why would I even want to do all that?
there's-
Go through these extreme like motions. He must have been telling the truth, or there must have been something driving that.
Yeah,
And
there's
why don't we believe that all of this is fairy tale? Well, it's in history of people being persecuted in the first century. You even look at atheists. Atheists know Jesus existed. They know
Real.
he lived a life. They don't necessarily believe he died and rose 3 days later, but they know about Jesus Christ. Even Jews nowadays know Jesus was a good guy. They don't believe he was God.
So that's what I have to say, because there's two different types of atheists. There's the ones that believe Jesus didn't exist, right? Or like people, or not even atheists, people who believe Jesus didn't exist,
right.
and also then there's the people who believe that I guess for Jews, I guess this would make the most sense. People who believe Jesus didn't even exist, right? And then there's the Jews who believe that Jesus existed, but he was not the Messiah.
Jews, Muslims, people like that.
And okay, so then you go into it. Okay, he was a good man, but all these other religions. I know Muhammad existed, but I don't believe that that's the truth, because Jesus has eyewitness accounts showing the divinity of his nature. Showing that he lived a perfect life. See, okay, that's one thing. Everything I read in Scripture says that Jesus lived a perfect life, and all that. Like there isn't a story where he sinned, right? But there's all these open spots where, what if he sinned in between there? I believe in my heart, because what the rest of the Bible teaches, that no, Jesus lived a perfect life.
That's where kind of faith comes in. Believing what you kind of
Believing
Filling
what you
in.
don't
Yeah.
see.
believing
Yeah.
what you can't see.
Now, faith is assurance of what we hope for, and confidence of what we do not see.
After Jesus died, he said to Timothy, correct? Timothy?
Thomas, doubting
That's
Thomas.
what I just said. After Jesus died, he said to Thomas, "You have seen, and that's why you have believed. But blessed are those who have not seen and yet still believe." You can't see everything that's ever happened, but to say, "I didn't see it, I'm not going to believe it," that's just, how am I supposed to believe something that's happened on the other side of the country?
Well, yeah.
I didn't
I mean-
see it. It could just all be fake.
How do I don't think anyone here has been to Russia. How do we know it's even there?
It's just, it can't be.
Or
It's just, no, we haven't.
Well, then that's okay. That's
We haven't seen it with our eyes.
I haven't seen it, so
well, that's
it's
the dumbest
not
part
there.
about flat earthers, right?
Yeah, no.
They have proof.
Would you just call me?
They have proof, right? And they look at it and say, "No, this proof's subjective. It's not my truth."
Yeah, I'm still. I always get confused when people mention
But no, I
flat
do-
Earth. I'm like,
I do
yeah,
like that.
that's just not possible.
I was
World War
gonna go
II
to-
never happened because I wasn't there.
It was just written in a book. See, that's the thing. how do we know that all these history books aren't just fiction?
We if we're gonna
We
believe
don't.
that and go about our lives believing everything that we've never seen just can't be real because we didn't experience it, then why do we?
Well, it's like
Do
if the
what we
Bible
do.
was, if the Bible was taught in schools, wouldn't that be a history book?
Yep.
Doesn't people
Yep.
try to disprove these small spots saying that science doesn't prove this because it's not in the Bible, right? The Bible's not a science textbook, and it shouldn't be used as a science textbook. The Bible should 100% be used as a history textbook. The Bible is some of the most accurate accounts of history ever. It's written over how many years is it? What, 400 or 4,000 something years?
A lot.
And with over 140 authors, or over 100, what is the numbers? Over
You got
40
this.
authors,
There we go.
and it's concise with the same message and doesn't contradict itself. And when people say there's contradictions, it's
See-
logically talked about because of the context of the verse.
the
It doesn't contradict
contradictions
itself.
or like contradictions, it obviously doesn't contradict. Or some people will also mention that translations aren't the same. It's
Yep.
not
But
the
we
same.
know that
But
it's literally stayed the same
when
because
you
of the Dead
have-
Sea Scrolls.
Yeah, when you have 600 different translations or different copies,
Exactly.
even if one word is wrong in every single one of them, it's bound like
Or it's just a lack of
You're going to
But
reading.
it
get the
hasn't.
same message.
It hasn't.
it has the same message.
It could just be a
literally
lack
hasn't
of
changed.
reading in context. You know, you can read a
Yeah.
verse.
True.
Jesus says, I am the rock. Is Jesus calling himself a rock? It's so you
He's
have
the
to,
pebble of the earth.
You have to have concepts. You have to understand context. You have to realize what actually is being said.
I was even gonna go back to Grayson's point, is that there have been 40 plus authors in the span of thousands of years, and it's all consistent, like all the time. And even in school, like let's say they're gonna teach evolution in school, you're gonna go off a science textbook. Give it 10 years, that science textbook might change because, oh, hey, this belief that we found, that's going to change. Nowhere in the Bible have I seen that. It's always, this is the message, this is what it said. Even different
also-
translations, this is what it's going to say.
2,000 years since Jesus lived, died, and rose, and that message hasn't changed once.
Well, they say that science is always changing, right? And they're like, oh, we found more proof that.
But then that can also go
true.
against stuff that
But-
they believed.
Mm-hmm.
see
And
science can change. History can't.
The Dead Sea Scrolls were literally the pinnacle of proving the Bible to be true and showing that it has not changed and the message has not
And
changed.
so why would I want to believe in something that's inconsistent, that always changes? Like, hey, this, what you really believed, it was wrong. Well, I mean, we were right, but it was wrong because we found something better. That's never happened in the Bible. I want to believe in something that's consistent and that has the same message.
Why would the Bible not aligning with science be an argument not to believe in the Bible when science doesn't even align with science?
Well, if you want to talk about like inconsistencies, my religion teacher he was talking about over this many years, over this many authors, the message was consistent and never contradicted. Over the 3 Disney Star Wars sequels, which had 3 different directors and story writers, nothing made sense. And I know Caleb could talk about it if he was actually in the room with us. He could talk about how the inconsistencies
It
among
did not
Star
make
Wars.
it did not make sense at all.
But exactly, how can you say that the Bible is not true?
Yeah, how
Given the proof, if someone can't do it over 10 years, right?
yeah, like how do 40 plus authors all, like, there's like a chart that you can even look up online where which books have like verses or things that they've taken out or connections that they have throughout the Bible.
Cross
It's
references.
it's this huge thing because there's so many connections and they all add up.
And the
There's no way you're
Quran has
never-
like nothing of
yeah,
that.
you're never gonna have a book that all adds up in that period of time with that many people in the same way that the Bible does.
Not only does the Bible align with the Bible, but the Bible aligns with everything we've ever learned in history. We look at, like I mentioned earlier, Emperor Nero. We looked at him. His name never once mentioned in the Bible, but we know he persecuted Christians in the first century. Why would there be Christians in the first century if Christ never died? That's a prime example of the Bible, Christ crucified, aligning with history, persecution of Christians in the early first century. The Bible always aligns with history, and it always aligns with itself, whereas we can't say the same about science.
I mean, yeah, because the only time Nero was even referenced would have been when Paul appealed to Caesar.
But his
And
name
name is never referenced,
never
right?
once.
And I was going to go to Alexander the Great, right? All these biographies about Alexander the Great were written way after his
Over 400 years after his death.
Jesus were eyewitness accounts written within the first century after his death, and then passed along, copied
Within
down
30 years.
the message, copied down and passed along to his followers for generations to come, and preserved.
And over those 2,000 years since Jesus, what's changed? The word changed to the word the. I mean, that's just like insignificant, to say the least.
I think one thing that I think we've covered being a Christian, right? Trying to be Christ-like and trying to
Spread the gospel.
spread the gospel, represent how to be that, how to represent that. I guess and we've gone into a lot of it actually. But I just want to bring it up and be a little bit more direct about it. I guess the next step of what we need to discuss about is salvation. Like, how do you discuss that with other people? Because we know there are different denominations. If an unbeliever's listening right now, believe it or not, there are different denominations within the Christian church, and that there are, I don't know, some opinions or differences, and some of that can be confusing. But it's I guess my question is how are you saved? That's the basic question I think unbelievers need to know, and how we can come across that.
You are saved through the faith you have in Jesus Christ, which you believe that he died because you were sinful. He loved you so much that he died and rose again to take eternal death and give that eternal sacrifice and atonement for your sins.
Sorry, I had a question going with that you said you needed faith, and obviously I agree with that. But going even back to what we said earlier, is having actions, professing your faith to other people.
Oh, absolutely.
Do you need to do good works to have faith? Is faith just believing, or is it I need to talk to other people about Christ?
I saw a brilliant analogy while I was watching TikTok. TikTok actually has a little bit of good, believe it or not. I saw a brilliant analogy that goes a little something like this. I might skew a few words, but the main point is going to be the same. There are two sides of a fence. On the one side of the fence is God, all things good, everything that has to do with God. And on the opposite side of the fence is Satan, all things bad, everything that has not to do with God. Way too often as sinful human beings, we look at God's side and say, that's a good side, but I want the negative things of Satan's side. I want the bad things of the world, sinful things, but that give me earthly pleasure. And instead of choosing the one side, we choose the fence. But then the day of judgment comes and everything goes dark. And then we see Satan approaching, and the sinner says, "What, Satan? I didn't choose you. I chose a little bit of you and a little bit of God. I wanted both." And Satan says, "No, the fence belongs to me." So what I'm trying to say here is, we can do all these things. We can do these sinful things, and we can also believe in God. But if the moral of our faith has nothing to do with God, and we're just saying, "Oh yeah, I believe in God, but I'm going to do all these dumb things," then do we really have full faith and full hope in God?
Amen, my brother. Someone showed me this video. I literally saw this the other day.
Thank you.
Where'd you find it? Send it to me.
No clue.
No, I think I saw this video on Snapchat, and I think I
you must
saved
have sent it to me then, because
I might have. That's what
Okay,
I'm looking at right
but
now.
anyways,
I'm like,
what I was gonna say is, don't be lukewarm.
You can't have a little bit of this, a little bit of that. But wait, how many of us can say that we're perfect and haven't taken both sides? Raise a hands. I don't see a single hand raised. We can't say we're perfect. We can't say there's nothing we've never done wrong, because that's not true. And it's not to say we're going to have to be perfect to obtain ourselves salvation. But what it is to say is, we can't say that we love God and then openly express ourselves in ways that contradict him. Once again, we can be sinful human beings and we're still going to have the hope of heaven. But that's not to justify the fact that we are sinful.
One thing I was going to ask you guys, for Dominic and Isaiah in particular, is you guys went to an apologetics conference, right? What did you specifically talk about at that conference that could help you in professing the Bible
so
or professing God, I guess?
So this is really good. I'm glad you talk about this. So this first and foremost, this apologetic strip is incredibly beneficial. I recommend it for other people. I think it's
Stand to Reason puts it on.
Yes, it was Stand to Reason, and I think another one is Reality.
It's the Reality Apologetics Conference. We go to the one in Minneapolis, Minnesota.
Right.
In Minnesota.
And it's great. And they do it a little differently. So they have how it's structured is they have what do you call it? Sermons. I'll just put it that way. They have a few sermons every now and then, but then you have breaks, and then you also have breakout rooms. So these breakout rooms, I believe, is the beneficial part of this whole apologetic strip. And what these breakout rooms do is that there are teachers or pastors that will go into separate rooms, and you get to choose what message you kind of want to listen to. So there are people that talk about homosexuality and proof of the Bible and things like that. And you can pick two of them while you're at the apologetic strip. And the two that I picked was something along the lines of proof in the Bible and how can the Bible be historically proven. And the other one is just spreading gospel. So literally what we discussed. And the one that was spreading of the gospel was very interesting. I actually bought a book of him, and the book's called Tactics, and it's really good. And it's just talking about how his life and the different things, just like the different strategies that you can use. I think I handed out the book to one of my friends, but yeah, basically just what we discussed about just being that representative, being kind, being gentle. And it was very good. The other breakout room was proof of the Bible. Like how do we know that the Bible's true? And I think that I agree with Jacob that that the Bible is historically true and that it's definitely an historical book. And the guy that was in this breakout room, he's actually a detective. He was
The cold case detective?
Yeah, he was a detective. So one of the things he did is that he kind of like put the gospel or the book of the Bible like on trial, I guess. And he was trying to, prove and all these things. And I guess one of his main things that he kept going back and forth was kind of what we discussed a little bit of there's consistent. So like an analogy he gave was he accidentally so he wants to go out and hang out with his son at a restaurant, and he's going to have some donuts, right? At
Understandable,
4:30.
I mean.
Yeah, at 4:30 at this restaurant. And the first text that he shoots out, he messed up the time. And then he's like, and then the son is like, is that the time? He sends out the message, same message. He corrects the time, but he messes up the place. And then he's like, is that the place? So he corrects the time and the place, but he messes up what they're eating. And then they're like, what's going on? And so he keeps sending out the same message, but he screws up one little thing. Finally, his son is like, okay, I get it. I know what we're doing. So by the time you know what the main message is, even though every single text has a mistake in it.
So, yeah. It's kind of, by the time there are more texts than there are words in the text.
Right. And so like, okay, based upon all of these texts, you can understand what's the main message. So when there are authors out there on the Bible who have recorded the Bible and have had many different copies, you look at all of the other copies. Yes, they may have like a few differences here and there, but you look at the main message. That's why the biggest thing of Dead Sea Scrolls, when we look back, that the Dead Sea Scrolls was written 1,500 years ago. And when we look into that, yes, they're written in Greek and Hebrew. So when we have a translator that translates between the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Bible that we have today, that's made, whatever, translation, ESV, NIV, any of that, King James, the message still stays the same. Even though some of the words may vary every now and then, and it's because maybe some language translations, because I think it's like Hebrew. Does Hebrew have any vowels? I think it was.
Like in written, no.
Right. So in the written language, Hebrew doesn't have any vowels, and in the English language it does. So yeah, there are going to be variations when you're trying to translate between different languages. But the message still stays the same, even for thousands of years. And having all of these different copies between many people, the main message. So that's just proof that saying that we can trust in the Bible because it has stayed consistent throughout thousands of years. So that's just one of the main things that I got out of it, that I thought it was really cool. It was like, it's consistent, and that we can base our belief on it. And it's definitely historical. We've seen it. We even, I think it was said, I don't know where it was from, but it was said that we have used the Bible to find cities that were once lost in like the Middle East and stuff like that. And so
I heard about that.
Yeah, there's like this civilization that they're like, oh yeah, it's just a forgotten land. And then when they go back in the Bible and they're like, there's supposed to be a kingdom at this place. And they're like, let's look at that. They go and dig around. Look at that. There's a city. They've never known it.
We've talked about this stuff in a religion class, too, where we watch videos talking about proving Old Testament or proving history, proving the Bible with history now, or with the future, with the current, the present.
A prime example of what you were talking about with the Bible aligning with the Bible, even though some of the words in one book might be a little skewed from a word in another book, but the main concept saying the same, is a prime example is the words of institution. We have in the Gospels different recollections of what Jesus was saying. Take and eat, this is my body. Even though in the different translations, the words aren't always the exact same, the concept is always perfect. So, like you were saying earlier, I can recall a story, Grayson can recall a story, you can recall a story, you, Dominic, and Justin can recall a story. We can all recall the same story, but we're not all going to have the same exact words, the same exact description.
It's actually more consistent if they're slightly different. Talk about court cases. If someone gives the exact same story, if two witnesses give the exact same story with the same really weird details, that is way more like not convincing than people giving it. Oh yeah, he was sitting like across, and I think he was wearing a black shirt and had some words on it, and someone's like, oh yeah, he was wearing a gray shirt and had his jersey number on the back. That would make way more sense than if someone was like, he was wearing a black polo shirt with 3 buttons. Like if you get the exact story, courts won't take that most of the time because they'll say it's circular evidence and they'll think that it's being faked.
If Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John all had the same exact, granted Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John aren't all written by them, like as in Mark was inspired by Peter, but if they were all written the exact same way, we would have to question the recollection. Like it would be pretty easy to make the argument that, someone had to have faked the Bible, and then to make sure they aligned with themselves, they wrote the same exact way every single time. But
the writing styles are different.
Exactly, like you were saying.
Luke's a doctor, and you can tell he's a doctor through his writing, like the way he the details he uses rather than like Mark, who was young, right?
And the fact that all these different descriptions completely align with what we know about Mark and Peter's telling to Mark, Mark's copy of what Peter told him, and Luke and John and Matthew. The fact that we can tell all these are slightly different just goes to show how true the Bible must be. Like if someone were to fake this, and to make sure everything completely aligned with each other in a perfect way, they would have to be something special.
So one thing I would say, like even a present example, right? If I was saying, remember sophomore year, like my sophomore year, so it'd been your freshman year, right? Remember sophomore year when this thing happened, tell you the story, and you're like, that's not what happened. It was like his room, and it would be slightly different, right? But we'd remember the same funny story or whatever, the same joke or whatever,
And then I would come up with some different detail. Also remember when this happened to him?
And then and we wouldn't remember the same things. And
right.
then That would make more sense.
That would be more valid
because
than
that's how humans work.
we all have the same exact recollection. And
because we're all different, you know.
That's a great point, man.
One thing, okay, this is literally going way back to the last episode. Since we're on 2 parts, you know, this is our second part of the episode.
Right.
Last episode, I was gonna ask you guys a question about how do you feel? So, I personally think that a huge opening or a huge, I don't know, need in our communities is Christian-based services, not necessarily like churches, right? But Christian-based services that are doing public work from a Christian base. So Christian lawyers, Christian counselors, Christian healthcare, right? Christian counseling. I think that these things are so beneficial and are so needed because it can help spread the gospel, help spread God's message without being, hey, we're a church, come to church on Sunday, right? I know a guy, he's a lawyer, and he won't do divorces because he's a Christian. And he's respected because of that, right? Or Christian counseling. It's like marriage counseling. Christian counseling, they won't recommend divorce, right? And I think that these things are such a good way to implement God's message, to show our good works, show our works through Christ in our public life. Teachers, for example, Christian teachers.
I have, for the listeners out there, I have full plans to go to a Christian college and end up becoming a teacher someday. And I agree with what you just said, Grayson. To express what you believe publicly versus to just build up everything internally and to not show other people what you truly believe makes way more sense for spreading the gospel. And now in my case, I'm going to go to a Christian school and end up teaching at Christian schools. So what good am I to non-Christians if I'm just surrounding myself around Christians the whole entire time?
I mean, that's one thing, because we talked about in our last episode where as a going to a Christian school, I should say, I don't have that opening to speak to people of other faiths, or
if you're just surrounded around Christians the whole entire time.
And not saying that's a bad thing.
Right.
Not like that's a bad way to be raised. But then, especially if you go to a Christian college, it's like you're missing out on being able to fulfill the Great Commission that God has given us in Matthew 28.
Sometimes the greatest way of strengthening what you believe and strengthen your faith is to see the opposite side and to, in a way, see that what they believe isn't necessarily correct, and that would help strengthen why you believe what you believe.
I was also going to make a point that you said that if you were going to surround yourself in Christians, be teaching at a Christian school, then you can take more value in the little things that you do, like talking to unbelievers. Like, let's say you're just going to Walmart and you're buying groceries and you start talking to the cashier. You can use that as a way to profess your faith, whether it's just being really nice or maybe even getting into a conversation.
Yeah.
You can use the little things like that. It doesn't always have to be that you're always surrounding yourself by unbelievers. It's the little things that you do out in public that you can just take, instead of taking them for granted, you can profess your ways or you can profess your faith in those ways.
A simple conversation starter could be something like, hey, what do you do for a living? Oh, I actually teach at a Christian school.
Absolutely.
And then they'll be like, well, why do you believe what you believe? Like, it's a simple way of just starting to tell why you believe what you believe, telling them about Christ.
And I almost feel like this would almost be like a good wrap-up to end on this, because that's what we're doing here, right? We're professing our faith by talking about it and putting it on the internet. And then this... Maybe it helps one person, right? Maybe one person listens to it that is in our families, and maybe one person listens to it, and they're like, these teenage guys who aren't afraid of humiliation because they're talking about their faith, being outspoken about it, talking about why they believe what they believe, and it gives them some sort of hope in realizing that maybe they're already a believer, maybe they're not, and they go, these guys are they're showing something that is different about them.
And as you mentioned, that one person can go and tell 2 people, who can go and tell 4 people each, who can go and tell. It's just an endless branch of you have to start somewhere. And if you get one person to tell other people, that could branch out into so many different people just hearing about the gospel.
Yeah, and honestly, I think that's probably a pretty good spot to wrap this up. So thanks you guys for joining us for part 2 of this episode, and we'll hopefully be uploading another one in the next 2 weeks here and see if we can get some more guests on and see what we can do with the podcast. But thanks for joining us, and goodbye.